/JS Monthly. That will get you inside GatherTown. This is a welcome note to everyone. We welcome you back to JS Monthly February. We have 2 and 1 demo talk, and we're going to be also speaking during the meetup inside GatherTown. You can follow us at JS Monthly London, and you can send us any questions you have for tonight's meetup. And I'm gonna pass it now to Julia, that she's going to talk about the introduction to low code with Node-RED. And Julia's gonna share her screen. I'm gonna stop sharing. 1 second. Stop share. Julia.
How is that?
Yep. I'm gonna put my camera off so everyone else and we're ready to go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Ars. This is really fun. I haven't really seen anything like this before, so I'm definitely really glad to be here. As mentioned before, I'm Yulia. I'm a developer advocate for Vonage. You might know us as Nexmo. We are going through a rebranding as a result of an acquisition. So tonight, if you're going to see code bits, there might be Nexmo, there might be some Vonage. We use them. Anything like this before, so I'm definitely really glad to be here. I apologize, I am hearing myself.
Go ahead.
Yes, I will. I just can't talk when I'm hearing myself, but now it is all fixed. So, tonight I wanted to introduce you to low code, since that's what I'm doing most of these days. I'm trying to find tools that enable more and more people to use our products and others as well. And I wanted to introduce you to low code using a tool that in turn introduced me to low code, and that is Node-RED. But before we get into that, let's have a look at what low code is, what no code is. We hear these terms kind of interchangeably, but they are not. So going forward, I will refer to no code whenever I'm talking about a tool or platform where the end user does not interact with code, does not see code. It's all a layer of abstraction. There is literally no code involved. On the other hand, low code would be anything from curly brackets onwards. So if there is a little bit of templating, all the way to writing actual code, which most of these cases is going to be JavaScript. But how did we get here? Let's have a look at how low code came about and who is using it anyways. Funny story. About 2 years ago, I started researching the topic, mostly around Node-RED, but I Googled low code, no code, flow-based programming, visual programming, anything really that I could come up with around these terms, and I couldn't really find a lot of valuable resources. There have been a couple, but definitely not exhaustive. And last year, I was giving a talk on Node-RED and repeated the same search, and a couple million search results came back. And last week, I did the same, and that's 3.7 billion right now. So it's definitely something that is becoming more and more popular. And if you look at the list, well, this is the top results that came out. It's no longer a question of what is low code. Well, it is definitely in the top results, but we also get things like what is a better low code platform or a better low code tool for the purpose of our task. So we've definitely come a long way. I've also come across this image from Mario Noyoso, who put together all these low code platforms. And to be honest, I have not interacted with about 80% of these. That's a lot. But if you take a look at it, I'm fairly certain that you can find at least one, if not more, that you have used so far. And maybe you haven't even thought about it being a low-code tool. It all started a long time ago, well, longish. From the 1960s, actually, there have been a good couple of experiments, or people tried developing visual flow-based tools to apply a level of abstraction on writing code. And it never really got too popular with developers. I'm not saying this is the only reason, but I see one main fault with these tools. So normally you would, in a low-code tool or platform, you would apply a level of abstraction to code to make it easier for the end user to use it, to be more efficient at achieving their tasks, to enable them to focus on the main logic. Now, if I'm taking away the complexity of writing code, but I'm adding back a visual complexity that looks something like this, which might be even more confusing than the initial code that I was dealing with, I don't think that's a user experience that goes far. So while there were quite a few of these, some of the most popular ones have gotten to the level of teaching kids about code, but I haven't really seen many of them sticking around. Nowadays, however, there's a whole new story about them. Nowadays, low-code tools and platforms look a lot like this. Definitely way more tamed than previous counterparts. So this would be Zapier, if this then that. That's really the name of the platform. Then we have Airtable, which, well, initially, from my understanding, started as a spreadsheet, weird cross between a spreadsheet and a database. But as far as I'm concerned, today, it is a fully fledged low-code platform. There's so much more you can do in it. Then we have Node-RED, which is a Node.js application built on top of Node.js. So whatever you can do in Node.js, you can do in here. And in some cases, I would even class Postman as a low-code tool. I might be writing pre-request scripts and tests, but if the end user comes in, fills in a couple of variables in the environment, and presses send, from my point of view, that's a level of abstraction applied for their lives to be easier. Hence, it would be a low-code tool in my books. And I believe that low-code truly is for everyone. And that I don't mean that low-code, one low-code tool is for everyone, but there is a tool out there for everyone. We just need to find the one that is suitable for us. And developers are people too, so there must be something out there for us as well. And let's go over to Node-RED, which, as I mentioned, is how I got into low-code. I think it's a really nice introduction for JavaScript developers because it's built on top of Node.js. And I also kind of prefer it for day-to-day tasks. So let's see how it looks. I like starting on their website, which is node-red.org. It is open source under the JavaScript Foundation. And it's a low-code programming platform tool for event-driven applications, which is amazing for APIs. However, it started in a more hardware-oriented environment, but it really does work well for APIs. we work with communication APIs, and I'm really happy with how it works for that. To get started, we go over to documentation, and there is a getting started section. Now, there are many ways to run this, and you can find them here. Today, we are going to run it locally. It is a runtime and an editor. So first, we are going to install it with npm, which I have already done on my machine. And now all I need to do is to come over to my terminal and type Node-RED. This will start the runtime and give me a URL. So server now running at, and that is port 1880. So I can head over to my browser and open that up to find my editor. Now I'm doing this for the first time, so it will prompt me to ask whether I would like to use projects. That's a really nice feature. It's GitHub integrated. I can create a project or clone a repository, but this is one of my test instances, so we are not doing that right now. But it's available for you. If you would like to build something and collaborate on it, definitely check that one out. So welcome to the Node-RED editor. Here in the middle, we have this canvas area. It's your workspace. This is where you are going to build your workflow. And your workflows are going to live on these tabs called flows. So I have one open by default. I can add many more by clicking add flow and then switch in between them. On the left-hand side, this is the most important thing, are your nodes in the node palette. So these are the bits that are responsible for the functionality, and you are going to drag and drop them into your canvas and connect them together with wires to define what is going to happen in the workflow. What I did here is I connected an inject node. So I mentioned that Node-RED is an event-driven environment. That means your workflows need to be set off in a way. So in a normal situation, that would be a webhook, a timer, a cron type event, or anything else really happening in your workflow, and that's setting it off. But for testing purposes, it is a node with a button. When I press the button, it sets off the flow with a value. Now the value is going to be passed along in the payload property of the message object. That's right, the interface in between these is JSON. So I have a message JSON object with different properties attached to it that communicates in between the nodes. And had I added more, that would still be the case in between all nodes that are connected with a wire. And by default, the inject node will send this timestamp, but I can select any other values that I prefer. For example, a string that is, let's do a hello world. Yes. As you can see, control and space toggles the sidebar, which is also used for typing emojis. So we're going to leave it as that. You might have seen that there are options up here with message, flow, and global. These are objects, and I could select the pass-in values. Message is the context of the message object that is in between all the nodes that are wired together. Flow is the flow object that is in context of one tab up here. And global is across your flows. So that would be anything in your Node-RED instance. But for now, we are assigning a simple hello world message to the payload property of the message object. Onto the debug. I can select to see the whole message object or just the payload, but let's see the whole message object to see its structure. In Node-RED, yes, I clicked done. If you see a red button, that usually means you need to press it. Done is how you save. Deploy is how you, well, save as well. On the right-hand side, you have first info and node help. Now, node help is really helpful because if you don't know what some of these nodes on the left-hand side do, you can hover over them. And there is a short description, click on them, or come here and under the node help, either scroll through all the nodes you have installed or search and click on them. And this is a little documentation-like area where you'll find out what that node does, something about inputs, outputs, and what's the expected behavior. If you are developing for your own packages, maybe this is where you put a link towards your own documentation. We are not using projects, but this is where your projects would show up. That is the Git integration. And onto the debug messages. This is your console. This is where your debug messages are going to appear. So now if I click on the button, that debugs the message object. With the payload value of hello world as we've set it, we have a message ID and we have an empty topic. This topic comes from the MQTT background of Node-RED. I tend to not use it, but you could set it to any string. And these are the values that are always attached to the message object, although you can attach many more to it. So that's all nice. If you are at any point thinking about importing, exporting flows and sharing them in other ways, then with version control, that is possible as well. You can either select part of a flow or a whole flow. Now, in this case, both of them are the same, but I selected the path. A part of a flow that is connected is called the path, and then come over to the hamburger menu and export. And this is our workflow. It looks a little nicer if we click on the formatted option, and it's a JSON object. Well, array of JSON objects, it appears. And it describes the nodes that we have in our workflow and the connection between them. So this is the inject node, the different properties it has, their values, the ID of the wire that is connected to it, a couple of details on where it's positioned in the workspace, and then the same for the debug node. So I can copy to clipboard and import it in the same way. So this could be on a different computer, in a different instance, quick and easy way to import and export certain flows. As long as you have the same nodes installed for the runtime, it will work. If not, it will warn you that you don't have the necessary nodes installed, so you will have a chance to do that. Well, install them. Now it's warning me that these already exist, but I can still import a copy. And this is how I would do it if it was a different path. Now I won't be needing two of these, so I'm going to delete the second one that we just imported. But before I do that, I'll show you that same settings imported as it was before. Yeah, that's all. Nice. But let's see something a little more exciting than Hello World. We briefly looked over at the node palette. So for this isn't exactly a default palette because I have my custom nodes that I added in, the ones that I'm working with. But as a default install, you will see the common nodes. These really are the ones that you would be using most commonly. A couple of function nodes. These help you build more elaborate workflows. Network, setting up webhooks, working with WebSockets. Those three are Vonage nodes. Well, ngrok is theoretically not a Vonage node, but my colleague Sam built it. And then webhook nodes, sequence for sequencing, parsing different files, and storage. So that's where your default instance ends, and the rest of it is things that I've installed. For example, the Nexmo package. If you find that you are trying to build something for which you would need a service that you cannot see in here, which will probably be the case because the default instance does not have custom packages or third-party packages, you can come here in the menu to manage palette. Under nodes, you will see all the packages that you already have installed. And if you click over to install, you can search for different services. For example, Airtable. Yes, and you'll see Node-RED contrib Airtable. That is a naming convention, and that would probably be the official package. If you would see Node-RED Airtable, that would mean that it's not contributed by Airtable. It was written by people who wrote Node-RED. For example, if we look at Twitter, because the Twitter nodes used to be part of the default build, well, not build, default instance. So Node-RED, Node Twitter, this is no, Node-RED contrib Twitter. That is a contribution, and normally the one without the contrib should be the one that used to be the default node. Okay, so let's see what does it take to build one of these nodes, because that's where the magic happens, because it is quick and nice to use, but you have to build it at the end of the day. I'm going to use one of our nodes, send SMS. It's using the Vonage SMS API. That is because it's a one-step thing, and I think it's better to see how it looks, how it behaves, and what code it takes then to go multi-step. I'm going to add it in between the inject node and the debug, so we are all set already. And there is a little bit of config that we need to do. First, it asks for my credentials. So I click on edit, and I need to provide my API key and API secret, which I would grab from my dashboard. Copy and paste these ones over, which I'm not going to do live on YouTube, but I could type my key in there and my secret in here and click add. Now what that does is I can come over here and find the configuration nodes, and we can see that of type Nexmo basic, it has added key secret pair node with my API key as a label. So moving forward, I no longer have to input that. I can come here and from the dropdown, select the one that I'm trying to use. And in this case, I'm going to select the one that has actual API key and secret in it, as opposed to the one that I just typed. Moving forward, To send an SMS, there are three things that I need to provide. That is to a destination number. That is a phone number that is going to receive the SMS from, well, this is the sender, this is you. Depending on the country where you are, it either has to be one of your phone numbers. So for example, the US requires that you have that number. In the UK, you can type anything really. Even strings, any alphanumeric value is valid. And text what you would like to send in the SMS message. Now, notice that we have these three fields with curly brackets next to them. That is because these three fields support mustache templating. So instead of typing a message here in the text field, I can do double curly brackets, message.payload, to refer to the payload property of the message object that we've set in the inject node. We do have a smiley face in there, so I'm going to click on Unicode and enable it. And we are set. I click on Done to save it, deploy for the whole flow to be saved. And I'm going to watch my debug area, what happens in there. Camera never really zooms in on this, but we'll try again. We always try. And there we have a message that you probably cannot see. Oh, you can. That's a first. Okay. And here in the debug area, we have our response object. Oh, now it wouldn't. Well, you can't exactly see me, but hopefully sometime that will go back to normal. And the debug message in the message object will have the response from the Vonage SMS API in payload. And that is indeed the expected outcome that we would get back when dealing with the Vonage SMS API. State is 0, that is success. Okay, how do you build this node? Well, going back to the documentation briefly. And instead of getting started, now we want to create node. And creating your first node. So if you start reading this, you'll soon realize that you need three things to create a node. One, a package.json file, and then an HTML file to define how this node looks and how the editor looks. As in the node editor, when I double click on the node and it opens it up. So in our case, that would be this. And a JavaScript file for the functionality. If you scroll further down, it also gives you examples for each one of those. For example, package.json, yes, you do npm init and agree to most things and answer any questions it might ask you. This is a really simple example for a lowercase, converting to lowercase function. So let's see how that looks like in our node. I'm going over to my terminal. This is currently running, it's a new tab. And to show you the file structure, I'm going to go into the folder where Node-RED is installed. I'm guessing this is quite small. And once I'm in that folder, I want to see the node modules. And so this is a lot, but I'm looking for Node-RED contrib Nexmo, because that is the package that contains this node. All right, open the file. We do not need that. So package.json, it looks a little more complicated than the previous one we've seen on their website. That is because there are quite a lot of nodes in the Nextmo package. So the example is for one node. This package contains many, so there are going to be a lot of things in there. But we are interested in this one, SMS REST. That is all. On to the HTML file, because remember, there are two more things we need, the HTML and the JavaScript file. So I'm finding the according files. Yes, HTML. So no, we are going first on HTML, right? So if you look at it, yes, it only has a maybe better on our end. So in case of our node, we have default values of credentials to from text and Unicode, as we've seen in here. So credentials to from text and Unicode. We are defining those. Then a couple of things like number of inputs and outputs. There are nodes that allow for multiple outputs, possibly inputs as well, but I haven't seen any of those. Icon, that's the image that appears in the left of the node, and label and palette label. Now, in case of the send SMS node, these are the same. But for example, the inject node, the moment you drag it into the workspace, it changes its name. So in that case, label and palette label, what appears in the palette would be different. So coming down here, this would be the form that collects the data. So credentials to from text, and down here we have the checkbox. Moving up to the next section, this is your node help. So going back in here, if you go to the node help, this short documentation-like area is what you're defining in there. And that is all. That is your HTML, and you are done with how it looks. Onto the functionality. Now, to understand this, I'm quickly going to open up the code snippets. All right, sending an SMS with Unicode because that is what we are doing. And we have the Node.js snippet, which looks like this. Taking that and the example provided by Node-RED on their documentation page, we arrive to our JavaScript folder file. And what am I doing here? So I am getting my credentials. I'm getting my data. Then I'm rendering these three values through mustache because remember there were the curly brackets. And that means something could have been a templated value, which we have. And then we need to render that through mustache. Then instantiating Nextmo, that is Vonage. And finally, I have my checkbox in there and sending the SMS. So this is the function that actually sends the SMS. Then I'm loading the response. I'm getting back into the payload property of the message object and returning the message object. There is a bit more to it down here that is getting the rest of the data, which we are not using in this case. So we can not go over that right now. But the custom bit that I have to do is really this much. So at the end of the day, it is just JavaScript wrapped into a visual editor. And from my point of view, adapting our SDKs or writing the nodes for Node-RED is just like adapting them to a different programming language, except I already have the node code snippets. So that makes it so much easier because most of the job is already done. It just needs the couple of custom bits. And I quite like this idea that if we take the level of abstraction, it's more or less at the same level as just another framework, except it's visual as opposed to code. So when would low code be a good solution? When could we consider low code? I really like, especially Node-RED for prototyping, that is rapid prototyping. It's a good thinking tool. I definitely drag and drop things, connect them together way faster than I type code. And by the time I'm done thinking, I already have something that works, like something deployable, something living on the internet, something I can show off. And that is definitely a nice competitive edge against anyone that is trying to still decide on the tech stack. Yes, I may decide to write the code for it and replace it, but at the time of showing off the idea, the architecture, it is already something that works. And our support engineers like it as well. It's really quick for recreating customer issues, use cases. So definitely speeds things up. Another good use case is for low value or low complexity tasks. So these are either the kind of things that are nice to have. So it's not your main revenue generating product, but maybe it's a Twitter to Slack integration that would be nice to have, but would take time to write the code for. Maybe not worth your development time, but you can quickly wire something together in a low-code tool and have it up and running in 5 minutes. So that's completely reasonable. Also for automating repetitive tasks, and we've seen an increase in popularity of low-code on this side, especially in the past year, where taking business operations online, also automating business operations has really gained some traction. For example, generating invoices, sending emails, all sorts of notifications. It just takes away all that repetitive work and enables you to focus on what matters most and where you are actually needed, because these low complexity or low value tasks may not need your full attention. And another thing that has been pointed out to me is maintainability and the fact that it is professional to build something that outlasts you. So you may be able to write the code, but sometime you might find yourself in a situation where there is a small team and you are the only developer or the only person who is able to understand, change, or write the code. And maybe you're even a contractor that is just brought in to build something and leave, but there is no one to maintain that code. What do you do in that case? Well, either build it and hope for the best, or find the lowest common denominator. As in, using a low-code tool might not be the most elegant or best solution for a certain project in this case, but it might just be the best one because you are done with it and the rest of the team can contribute, can understand it, can change it, can maintain it. So it is a viable solution. Actually, someone told me that they have built the whole business operations of a company on Zapier out of this consideration, because it was indeed the best solution for them. And finally, you're not a production developer 24/7, so sometimes you might find yourself in one of these cases. So maybe you're building something over the weekend, you're experimenting with IoT, teaching the kids about code, about programming, about building things. And sometimes low-code might be a good call. So let's see, when would it not be a good call? While low-code has helped a lot of businesses, especially in the past year, with going online and getting out of a crisis situation or managing it to a certain extent, it is not a replacement for development resource. Low-code is not this new thing that is going to come around and replace developers and enable everyone to do everything without developers. The way I see it, yes, it does empower less technical audiences to build their ideas, which is amazing, but it also is a tool for us. It alleviates developers. It is a tool, it is a helper, it is not competition. Also, when using low-code, it's more often than not a platform. So if you're building something like a revenue-generating product on top of it, you need to be aware of the risks of building on top of a platform and make your decisions accordingly. But at the end of the day, I believe that it all comes down to the efficiency of writing code and picking the right tools for the right problems to come up with the right solutions. Sometimes it will be code. Most of the times it might be code, but sometimes, from time to time, it might just as well be a low-code tool. Thank you. I'll be wrapping up in a minute, so if you have any questions, you should start typing now. If you would like to see more low-code things, then I'm running a Twitch stream every 2 weeks on Wednesday at 3 p.m. UK time. It was yesterday, so the next one is going to be in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday. I will leave up some resources in case you would like to screenshot them. And with that, I thank you.
Hello, thank you for the talk. It was quite interesting, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people learned quite a lot. And let me see if there's any questions from the people inside GatherTown. You can post your questions on the chat room on the right-hand side, where it has like a number of people that they are inside the GatherTown. In the meantime, how did you find out about Node-RED, and how did you get started?
So my colleague Sam Machin actually started building things with Node-RED. We were at a meetup. No, actually, it was a hackathon. Yes, it was an over the weekend hackathon where everybody was building things. And I was passing by, and I've seen these visual things on his screen, and who I know that is really technical, really down to the code, to always writing the code, coming up with amazing things, IoT, all the things. And I've seen these visual interface, and I'm like, oh, what are you doing in there? And then spent most of the weekend with him looking at Node-RED. And then it actually developed into something that we do at Vonage. We developed, well, to be fair, he developed most of the nodes initially, and then we started supporting it. And then I switched my focus onto low-code tools as well.
What is the first tool you developed with Node-RED? Do you have an example?
Um, I don't keep them,
But what
especially that I started working on our package yesterday. But the first thing I did,
Or if you have an example of how someone could start working with Node-RED with a simple example, have you got in your links, or you could provide it later maybe?
so um, actually the first link
Mhm.
goes to our blog uh, with a query parameter set to Node-RED. That is all the tutorials I have written on how to use Node-RED. So these are a lot of great examples. Something that I remember that I did might not have been my first project, but one amongst the first projects I've built with Node-RED was something to play music into a Google Meet call, because we had this tradition of playing music at the end of the weekly team call, and we all started to try different things. Everyone was playing music from their desktop, from a phone, and it never really was a great experience because you couldn't really hear it. And then I built this Node-RED flow that had different buttons. So the inject nodes, there were multiple inject nodes connected in, and each of them started off the flow with a different URL towards some type of music, or our boss singing at a meetup or company event after inhaling helium.
Okay.
So there were many options for people to listen to as a playout music, and it was a fun experience building it and then using it for a year.
But I guess this would have been much more harder to build it without Node-RED, right? So what would
Oh,
you say are
definitely.
disadvantages like Bing by not using Node-RED Bing? Like you have to write much more code, right?
I'll be honest, I never even tried it. And there
Exactly.
was a team of 20 to 30 people who write code on a daily basis, and nobody took the time to even consider writing it. I think that says a lot about how much time was spared by using Node-RED. Also, it was interesting because we had another team meeting, well, team building. And during these team building weeks, we usually have hack days, one or more. And one of my colleagues was trying to build this app that would call repeatedly his daughter's doctor's office, because they would never pick up. And then he thought he would automate it to call it so many times in a row until someone picked up. And at some point, he reached the blocker, so he didn't exactly know how to go forward with it. And then I went over, I tried to look at it. I'm not a Python person. Like, I cannot help you with this, but I can build it in Node-RED. And an hour later, we had it working.
Okay, no, that's really good. These good examples because we had also a talk before from Node-RED from the creator, but it's good to get this back because it looks like a great tool and great thing to use. What we are going to do, we're gonna do. If people want to ask any questions to Julia, because we're in Gather Town and we can see each other. After the next lighting talk that we will have, you can actually go into the main hall and you can chat to Julia and you can ask her any questions. And don't forget, this is the first time we are trying this software. We have been spending a lot of time building it, so that there are a few things that we're still trying to understand and work them out. So give us our feedback to help us to improve it. But yeah, any questions that you have, by all means, you can ask Julia face to face on with your camera. You don't have to send a chat and all of that. Um, Thank you very much, Julia. I was looking forward having you as a speaker for the past 3-4 years that we know each other. You are helping me also with CityJS, and it was quite a great honor to have you at JS Monthly. And I'm probably going to give you like a virtual clap for the great talk. And yeah, we're going to now have like a small demo of a new app from Colin. And I'm going to bring Colin in on stage. And then after that, we're going to have a break. So Colin, if you could bring your camera in. And Julia, thank you very much for everything.
Thank you so much, Aris, for having me. Hopefully I can come back once in person as well. And
Yeah, exactly.
if anyone has any questions, come and find me.
Thank you very much. Colin?
Hey, everyone.
Hello, Colin. We're both in a tropical place.
Yep.
Julia, if you stop sharing, and then Colin, if you could start sharing your screen, and we could do like a small demo.
Sure.
And you can also give us a small introduction about what you're gonna show us.
Okay.
Colin, by the way, he's gonna be talking at CityJS next month. This is a small warm-up of what he's gonna talk about, but you can also see a new app that he's working on.
Awesome. Thank you, Aris. And I guess just to give everyone a little bit of background, my name's Colin. I'm the founder of Clerk, and we provide user management as a service. And what we mean by that is all of sign up, sign in, manage my profile, set up two-factor auth, really that whole suite associated with the user's accounts page. And I guess we've really optimized for Jamstack developers. And for the demo today, I'm going to show you how to add a sign up, sign in, and profile management to a brand new Next.js app. So where I am right now, this is the Clerk dashboard. And first thing we have to do is create an application. And I'll just call this JS Monthly. I'll change the color too for good measure. I don't like that color. Cool. I think I ended up on the same Clerkish blue. And right away, you get started with a development instance. And so this is what we're going to use in localhost to be able to sign in and out of localhost. But we don't have an app yet. And I guess to make a brand new Next.js app, we're going to follow our quick start. You know, I feel like I should try to get my photo here so Aris isn't. Let's see. There we go. Cool. All right. I'm bad at Zoom. Nope. Never mind. Anyway. Okay. So quick start. Here we're going through the Next.js quick start. I've actually already created a new Next application. And so I'll just show you my console here. I've created a Next app called JS Monthly Demo. And then I've CD'd into it and then added the Clerk NPM module. This is the code for that. And so this is basically going to be our workspace. And so we've done the first two steps here. And then the next step is to create environment variables. And so if you've never used Next.js before, they give you a first-class way of injecting environment variables into the process. And that's with a file called .env.local. And so we'll create that now. And I'm just going to save it. Yep. And I'll copy these over to start, but then we actually have to get these URLs from our dashboard. So first we need the front end API, and that's right here. And then we need the sign-in URL. And that's right here. Okay, carrying on with the demo, I need to now start the development server. We'll run yarn dev. And we haven't actually changed any of the code yet. We've just added these environment variables. So on localhost 3000 right now, we're just seeing the regular Next.js hello world. Now, what we're going to do as part of this quick start is we're going to take this and we're going to lock it behind a login screen. So you won't be able to access this hello world page anymore. And to do that, we have to configure basically the entry point in Next.js, which is this underscore app.js. So this impacts every Next.js page. So right now it's just returning whatever the page component is, and it just passes everything through. We're going to change that to require a login. And so I'm just going to copy and paste the whole thing in and then kind of walk through a little bit line by line what's going on. So first of all, we're pulling in those environment variables that we set just so we have access to them later. But then this is the my app that we just replaced. And first thing we've done is we wrapped it in the Clerk provider context. And that basically tells the rest of the React application, like whether or not a user is signed in. We need to pass the front-end API URL into the provider, and that's in our environment variables. And then we also need to pass how to navigate between pages to Clerk. The logic after this is it's pre-configured so that you can have public pages or pages that require a sign-in. We're going to make it so that every page requires a sign-in. So public pages right now is just empty. And that puts us into this section of the rendering block. And you can see here, like it's hopefully pretty intuitive. So if you're signed in, we render the component. And if you're signed out, we render this redirect to sign-in component. And the redirect to sign-in just sets window.location out to the Clerk sign-in URL, which again is set in our environment variables. This signed in and signed out component that comes from Clerk. It's just a utility component that you could use anywhere. So if you're doing like a header and you want to change the header based on if someone signed in or not, you can use these components. But I'll give this a save now. And if everything's working, I should get redirected away from that Next.js homepage. And that's what just happened. And now I'm on my sign-in URL. In development, this is on a Clerk-owned domain. In production, you'll be able to set this so it's just accounts.yourdomain.com. But from here, I can sign in. Oh, and I'm not actually signed into Gmail. That wasn't a good idea. We'll go back. I'll sign up manually. I don't have a password manager here. I'm just going to jam on my keyboard. And I'm just waiting for this code. So again, this also works just right out of the box, text messages. And now we're back on localhost, so back in our React app, and we're signed in. And so we're seeing this hello world again. Kind of close out this demo. I know it's a lightning talk here. I'm going to pull in, I'm going to replace the Next.js hello world with Clerk's own hello world. And I'll just copy this. And this is the index file. And I guess I really want to call out two things here. So we're pulling in this user button component and the use user hook. And the use user hook, it has a bunch of variables on it that you might want to present about the user. So right now I'm just pulling the first name off of it. And then the user button, I think it's easiest to just show you what it looks like. So this is saved now. And here we are back on the home page. And so you can see hello Colin, that's my first name. And then this is the user button. So I I just signed up. I didn't use OAuth, so there's no picture here. We're just showing a regular icon. But from here, I can go and I can manage my account. I can come in, I can set up two-factor. All of this just comes out of the box. The feature we're working on right now is a way for you to like remotely revoke other sessions and also notifications when people sign on from new machines. So we're really trying to solve like the entire user management problem. But that's pretty much everything. You know, we want to make it really easy for anyone to just start a new application. And usually one of the first things people need to do is set up user management. And, you know, I don't know, I wasn't timing myself, but I think we just did it in about 10 minutes. So hopefully new app developers can be off to the races a little bit faster.
Thank you very much for the talk. We can have like a question. So what do you think the advantages are for developers using Clerk?
Yeah, I think it's really speed of development to start, but it's also just, it's going to end up being a more professional solution than you would normally build yourself. Like because it's our job to do user management, we get to spend a lot of time thinking about how should two-factor work and how should OAuth work and all of these things. We'll add in session revocation. Like most new apps don't have session revocation. So like that's really where we get to show off a bit. I think we're honestly inspired a lot by Google. If you look at like Google's account management page, it's fantastic. And I think most smaller applications don't have that yet. And it makes sense, right? Google is a massive company. They could throw a lot of engineering resources at it and a new startup can't. So we'll be able to throw resources at that for you. And our goal is just giving all of that to you as quickly as possible. And I think hopefully that's what we've pulled off here.
Oh, that's great. We will now go to a break, but if anybody wants to go and talk to Colin and to Julia about the stuff you just saw, it was quite a lot of nice features. You can ask them directly on inside GatherTown. And we're going to come back in 10-15 minutes and we're going to talk about Fastify with Simon. Thank you, Colin. It was a great talk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problems.
Bye.
My pleasure. Thank you. So we're gonna have now our second speaker for today. So Simon Plenderith, he's going to talk about how to make the most of modern with Fastify. Simon, I'm gonna stop sharing, and you can share your screen. Give me 1 second. Can you share your screen? I think I was not sharing.
Cool.
Okay, we are ready to go.
Thanks, Iris. Hi, everyone. Let me just get this set up here. And alrighty. So, all right. So this evening, I'm going to be talking about how you can make the most of modern JavaScript with Fastify. In this talk, I'm going to run through what Fastify is, and then we'll take a little bit of a step back and find out about promises and async await in Node.js, then how that relates to Node.js frameworks, and why support matters for async code in these frameworks, what the state of support is in Node.js frameworks today, and then we're going to go and look at Fastify and how that works with async code. We'll do a bit of hands-on stuff with some JavaScript and some async code, try a few things out and see how that works. Then we'll run through a few more things about how Fastify works out of the box with plugins and validation and logging. And then we'll wrap things up. If you're interested in trying out Fastify, I'll give you a few pointers on how you can get started. So Fastify is a web framework for Node.js, and it's got a lean core. So it means it's not particularly opinionated. It doesn't have any kind of MVC patterns that it's forcing on you. It doesn't provide an ORM, for example, to talk to a database. You're pretty much free to use whichever plugins you want. So there are Fastify plugins maintained by the Fastify team, as well as by the community. Fastify has native support for async code. So this means promises and async await in modern JavaScript. And we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go further into the talk. There are two other key features that Fastify has out of the box, and that's validation and logging. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that's so important to be included in the framework. So Fastify is a really developer-friendly framework. It's designed to be expressive, and hopefully you'll see that in some of the code examples we'll run through. It also has TypeScript support. So if you're using TypeScript, there are full TypeScript definitions included with Fastify, meaning you don't need to install any extra dependencies to get those types. If you're not using TypeScript, you'll hopefully get some benefits too. If your code editor supports type hinting, you'll get that out of the box with Fastify. So Fastify is fast, as the name might suggest. According to the benchmarks they have for Fastify, it's the fastest Node.js framework available today. Those benchmarks are available on their website, so you can go and check out the code and how they're comparing it to other frameworks. You'll see this tweet over in the corner here from Matteo Collina, who's one of the co-maintainers, one of the lead maintainers, sorry, of Fastify. And he makes the point that performance doesn't matter until it absolutely does. So the kind of thinking behind that is you don't really want your framework at any point to end up being your bottleneck. So it's worth choosing a framework that's going to grow with you and the kind of traffic that you might have going to your APIs and your applications. Fastify is production ready. So it's already being used in scale by lots of large companies. I won't advertise them here today, but you can go and check out on the Fastify website. It has a listing for some of the organizations who are using Fastify today. One of the sort of notable use cases at the moment is the COVID green exposure notification API service. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that's being used in Ireland, Scotland, and several US states to power the exposure notification systems. So these APIs are handling millions of requests per day. So I think it's safe to say that Fastify is production ready. So promises and async await in Node.js. Now, Node.js at this point has had support for promises for the best part of, well, over 5 years at this point. And async await has been supported since v7.6. So that's 4 years that we've had these features available in Node.js. And this means that callback hell, which some of you might remember, has pretty much gone away. And async await allows us to get rid of the long, messy promise chains that you started to see in some applications after promises were available in Node.js. So these features are now widely used across the Node.js ecosystem. For the rest of the talk, I'm going to refer to promises and async await collectively as async code. So why does support matter for async code in Node.js frameworks? I think it's really important that the Node.js framework you're using has built-in support for async code. One of the main reasons for this is that if it doesn't, you're at much greater risk of having unhandled promise rejections. This is an error you might have seen at some point in your terminal when developing with Node.js. So it's an unhandled promise rejection warning. Now, the error message here doesn't seem so severe, but what it can actually cause is memory leaks in your application because these promises that have been rejected aren't being handled, and you have a long-running node process. Your application's in this kind of unknown state, and it effectively can end up becoming unstable, eventually crashing. And from Node v15 onwards, which you're probably not using in production just yet, it will actually throw an error and crash your application. So this is something you can enable currently, but it will become the default behavior. Now, this is really unfortunate if you're not using a framework that supports async code, because it's very easy to miss writing error handling code. Now, I don't want to pretend that Fastify is the only framework with async code support, because it's absolutely not. So I went and took a look at some of the popular frameworks that people are using today to look at the level of support. This is by no means an exhaustive list. And you can see here that the support for async code is fairly mixed. It was surprisingly hard to figure out from the documentation which frameworks actually had full support for async code. So you can see here that Express, which is the most popular Node.js framework by a mile, still today has no native support for async code. There's not been a release of Express for almost 2 years at this point. But you can, if you need to, like hack in support for async code with a library. Fastify has no native support yet at this point. So support was merged in mid last year, and it's slated for a v9 release, but I'm not quite sure when that's expected to come out. Now, Koa, another popular framework, does have native support for async code, so you can safely use promises and async await. The same for Happy, and Sales.js also is a full stack framework. So it's a little bit different to something like Fastify, much more opinionated. It kind of encourages an MVC patterns. That has native support. And so does Nest. So Nest is another full stack framework. It's worth mentioning that it's using Express under the hood. So I'm imagining they're doing some kind of patching to give it async support. But they also give you options to use Fastify. So if you're considering using a full stack Node.js framework, that's worth knowing about. So when it comes to Fastify and async code, as I mentioned earlier, it's natively handling promises, supporting async await. And this means that routes for handling requests will catch uncaught rejected promises for you. You should still be writing error handling code, but this provides you with a safety net. So it allows you to write asynchronous code safely. It also lets you do some neat things. So you don't necessarily have to call a function to send a response buddy. You can just return a value. So here in this example, we've got an arrow function, and it's the short syntax to return a value, and then Fastify is handling sending that arrow back. But we can look at how that's working in a little bit. So now we're going to go hands-on with some asynchronous code, and we're going to look at how they work, how this code works in Express and Fastify. As I mentioned, Express doesn't have any async support, but Fastify does. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how they behave differently. So I'm going to take this off full screen, and we'll switch into code editor and terminal. So here is a really basic Express application. We're importing Express, and we're instantiating a new Express instance. This user root that we have here is using a get user function. This get user function, you'll notice, is resolving a promise. So this is kind of simulating if you were getting a user record from a database. And what we're going to do now is start that server running. And down here, we're going to make a curl request to the application. So we should get a response back. Even though Express doesn't actually have support for async code, this still works. So it might give you the impression that everything's going to be working okay with async code in Express. However, if we start changing our user function to effectively return an error, so here we're going to reject a promise instead. So perhaps something's gone wrong in our database layer, for example, and you'll notice that there's no error handling code in our root handler function here. So let's take a look at what happens when we make a request to that. All right, so now you'll see the dreaded unhandled promise rejection warning error, which from Node v15 onwards will actually crash the application. I'm running Node v14 here. You'll also see that our curl request is completely hanging. So there's nothing actually happening in terms of a response coming back. Express doesn't know about the rejected promise. It hasn't caught it. It's really not a good situation to be in. So let's switch over to minimal Fastify application, which is very similar to what we were doing with the Express one. This Fastify application, the only thing that's a little bit different is we've enabled the logger, which is built into Fastify. And we can run that server now like this. And we are going to make a request against that server. And you can see the request has come into the server and we've got the data back. Now, if we do a similar kind of thing to causing an error as we did for our Express application, we'll see how Fastify handles that. So note again that we don't have any error handling code inside our root handler function, just assuming that everything's going to run okay. So we'll make a new curl request, and you'll see that a request has come back. Fastify has handled that error for us, that promise rejection, and it's now pushing it out into the terminal, and we now have a response coming back to our client, which is great. So ideally, we should have some error handling code in here, but we've got that safety net that I was talking about earlier. So now we'll put some error handling code in here, and we can catch this error and do something a bit more with it. So we could, if we wanted to, just rethrow the error. So this is worth knowing that you can actually throw errors, and Fastify can take care of that. So we see the same kind of response that we did before. It's the same as if we just let the error fall through without catching it. What we could do though, let's in this case pretend it's a user record that wasn't found. We can set status code on the error object, and we can change it to a 404. So that's quite a simple way of manipulating that error response. And cool. So we'll just do a little bit of refactoring here, and we'll see how we can turn this into a little one-liner, which I showed you earlier, which will send a response back for us without us needing to call reply.send. Let's clear that up. So now we've got this one-liner with the arrow function, and you can see that we've got the error coming through, and Fastify is handling that error for us. We can restore our original functioning code, and we should be able to see that response coming back nicely here. So you can see the async code support is very, very different between Express and Fastify. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what async support looks like in a framework. So just to kind of wrap things up here, we out of the box, some of the things which Fastify gives you are plugins and validation and logging. We'll take a quick look at some of these things now. So if you're familiar with the Express framework, everything is middleware. Now in Fastify, everything is a plugin. It's not completely one-to-one the same thing. For example, plugins have their own scope in Fastify. Now, this is a really important thing and encourages a separation of concerns. It means that you can't have sort of weird dependencies between everything, and it doesn't force structure on you, but it encourages you to structure things. So you're not, for example, forced into an MVC pattern, but you are encouraged to kind of isolate things. And this helps with keeping your code maintainable, but also testable. So plugins can contain roots, or they can customize core Fastify objects with decorators. So you can see here we have this YOLO decorator, and inside our YOLO root, we can actually call that to send back a response. This is a very basic example. For every plugin, you can register them. So for example, this code here could be in a separate module, and we'd import it and use it. This allows us to make our application very modular and separate all of our concerns. One of the other things that Fastify has out of the box is validation. Now, it's using AJV, another JSON schema validator, to do request validation. And this means you can define validation rules with JSON schema. JSON schema is compiled to ES6 code by AJV in memory, and this helps make the validation very fast. So you can see here an example of the schema, of the JSON schema, and then it's been used by the Fastify root to validate a request body. In this case, this is we're simulating a bad request that's gone through with a missing first name, and this is the kind of error you would get back by default with this validation. It's really nice that you don't have to go and choose a validation framework. It's kind of all taken care of for you, and it's easy to integrate. And last but not least, logging. So logging can often cause performance issues in Node.js applications. And there's actually a lot of things that have to happen under the hood for data to be serialized and then transported elsewhere, for example, to a third-party service. So it's really nice that Fastify actually has logging fully integrated. There's no need for you to go and spend time choosing and integrating a logger. Fastify uses a fast and flexible logger called Pinot under the hood. And as we've gone through this talk this evening, you've seen some of the kind of output that gives you by default. You can get pretty printing in development, and it's very customizable. So if you're wanting to get started with Fastify, there's really extensive documentation on the Fastify website. There's a rich ecosystem of plugins, both Fastify core team maintained and community maintained. And there's an excellent example application created by Thomas, who's the other lead maintainer of Fastify. This shows core Fastify concepts, best practices, and recommendations. and that's really worth checking out. There's also, if you're coming from Express and you're looking to migrate your applications, you don't have to go all in on Fastify straight away. There is a plugin which can help ease this migration called Fastify Express. That allows you to have a smoother migration path. And there's also a community Discord server where you can get help and support from the Fastify community. So that's everything from me for this evening. Thank you for watching. I blog about Node.js at simonplen.com, and I also send out a weekly-ish newsletter which can help you build better Node.js applications. You can follow me on Twitter at simonplen, and thank you again for listening.
Thank you, Simon. That was quite interesting. I did use Sales a long time ago. What would you think are the main advantages of Fastify over the other frameworks that you describe?
So one of the advantages I see of Fastify is that it gives you the option to integrate whichever plugins and libraries you want to use. So this is definitely a personal preference thing. So frameworks like Sales.js, they are very much full stack frameworks, so they're very opinionated about how they're structured. And that's great for some use cases, and some people will absolutely love that. Personally, I like to have a bit of flexibility. So it really, I think, comes down to personal preference, but Fastify is much more similar to something like Express because it's a much more kind of lightweight framework with limited stuff built into the core. And then you can kind of, as I mentioned, augment things with plugins in the same way you would middleware with Express.
How would you recommend for someone that doesn't know a lot about Fastify and they could start using Fastify? What would be the initial steps that they need to follow in order to learn to use Fastify? And also, how would you use it effectively? Because we start learning tools like this, and sometimes we're using it the way we think it's the right way, but we don't know what is the best way.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So what I've found to be the best way to get started with Fastify is the Fastify documentation. It's actually really impressive. They've got a full getting started guide. And what I liked about it compared to possibly some other libraries I've used is that it does give you very quickly practical examples. It kind of quite quickly moves beyond Hello World, but you can start to see some of the core concepts of the framework. So I've got my talk slides up on GitHub, github.com simonplen talks. And so if you want to go for the links through there, I'll be posting some stuff on Twitter as well. And the example app, which I mentioned by Thomas, the lead maintainer of Fastify, is a really great way to get an idea of the kind of best practices with Fastify. Obviously, these kind of things can be subjective, but if you want to know how the people who write the framework use it, I think that's probably a really good way to get started.
And what about the community of Fastify? How can you get to speak to maintainers and people like you that know Fastify quite well?
Yeah, so
Is
there
it like a
is.
channel, and how do they? Is it like a Slack channel or something like people that can reach to you and talk to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a Discord server for Fastify, which I've included in my talk notes. So you can join Discord, and that's an active community that all the maintainers and the contributors are hanging out there. It's a Discord server that I hang out on as well. If you're not really so much into doing chat, there's actually a Fastify help repository on GitHub where you can raise an issue if you actually need help with things. So they're pretty proactive in that regard. There's also discussions on GitHub for Fastify. If you're kind of having any kind of issues and things you want to raise, they're usually pretty fast in terms of responding on that. But yeah, Discord and GitHub are the main ways I recommend.
That's great. Thank you very much for the talk. You're gonna be in the lounge now with everyone else in GatherTown, but you're gonna be also in the CityJS conference. You are one of the amazing people buying a ticket and supporting our community, and thank you for that a lot. But yeah, if you want to ask any questions to Simon, we're gonna stop the stream now, and you can come into the Gather Town and you can ask any questions you have. Thank you, Simon. Clap, clap as well.
Thanks,
for you.
Aris. Thank
It was
you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.